Recording in progress.
All right, welcome everybody to week 1 of How Missouri Runs Elections with Brianna Lennon. I hope is it Brianna or Brianna? Brianna Lennon. She serves as the county clerk for Boone County, Missouri. She previously worked in the Missouri Secretary of State office as Deputy Director of Elections and Elections Counsel and holds a law degree and master's in public policy from the University of Missouri. Brianna is also a certified elections registration administrator through the National Association of Election Officials. So, and no, that's just for the in-person people. Oh, okay. So I think you're good because your mic's right above your head.
Oh, okay.
So I will turn it over to Brianna. She, because of the material she's presenting, she's fine with taking questions throughout. So online, if you can enter them into the chat box, and you'll just periodically check that. But otherwise, enjoy and thank you. Thanks. Oh, let me share your screen. I already have it. All right. You can use that or. Okay.
Right. We do have one in-person person, so if I keep looking around, that's why. And I know the weather is not the best today, so I appreciate everybody that is online. And I'm going to open the chat too so that I have a little chat box on the side. But my name is Brianna Lennon. I'm the county clerk, like Lindsay was saying. And this is kind of an expansion of what we talked about if you came to the half semester course last year. We talked very broadly about a lot of the big subject areas. When I had the opportunity to kind of expand on that, I wanted to make sure that people that hadn't taken the course before could still get some of that high level information, but also so that we could go more in depth. So it is now 8 classes instead of 4, which gives us a little more leeway and hopefully provides a little more detail and opportunity to ask questions for things. So my goal for this course really is to give a good understanding of the structure of Missouri's elections, how we do things in Boone County, just to give kind of an overview of that, and also talk about how all the processes and things fit together. So on that note, this is how we're going to be structuring this class. So we've got 8 classes to get through all of these different things. Today's is the 30,000 foot view. It's really just going to be little overviews of each of the different concepts that we're going to be talking about. A little in depth in some of them, just so that you get some sort of bearings on where we're going to be starting from to talk about. But then we're going to dive into specifics about voter registration. And these aren't going to just be limited to, okay, how do I register to vote in Missouri? Literally the concepts of voter registration. So how it's done, other ways it could be done, other ways it's done in other states, the good, the bad, how all of that intersects with each other, how we can reform things if things are going to be reformed, some of the drawbacks of what we're doing now, all that kind of stuff we're going to cover in voter registration. Absentee voting is a lot more than I think what people generally come to mind when they're thinking about mail-in voting. So in Missouri, we have in-person and we have mail absentee voting, but there are lots of different kinds. It tends to encompass also early voting, basically any kind of voting before election day itself. So we'll dig into those and talk about some data and things like that. I really like sharing data. So where I have data, I will be talking about that. And then we'll get into voting equipment, and that'll be everything from the tabulators, the machines that we put ballots into to count the actual ballots, to all of the other elements of what goes into an election that involves technology, how that has evolved over time, go into a little bit of the past of how ballots have been tabulated over time and why voting equipment has been introduced in various iterations and the laws that have kind of impacted how we've gotten to where we are. Then we will talk about poll workers, which doesn't sound like it would be a whole hour and a half discussion, but poll workers are different depending on what state you're in, what you're doing. all the different jobs that poll workers and election judges can do. So we'll talk about that in class 5. If you did the last class, I called that one the human elements of elections. And so that's where we're going to start pulling in that element of why it's important that people make up the elections process and how it's important to be a part of that process. Then we'll talk about audits and certification. That's the part of an election that happens after election day. It ensures that we've done everything correctly and that all of the results are accurate and that we have confidence in what the results are from those ballots. So we'll talk about the different types of audits. We've tried some pilots of different audits in Boone County, and so have some other counties, basically to talk about different ways that we can improve the confidence of our elections by doing these audits and certification after the fact. Then we'll go into a higher level conversation about elections across the country, how they're structured. We're a very decentralized country when it comes to our elections. We don't have a federal model. We have another in person. We don't have a federal model when it comes to creating and administering an election like you would think of in Canada or the UK, or many other countries actually have federal oversight over every single part of the elections process. We have some advisory boards. We have the Election Assistance Commission, which exists to offer guidance and resources, but they don't have any legal authority over how elections are run. So it's very, very, very local. So talking about how that is set up and then also the impact that that has had having a decentralized system. And then we're going to talk about the state of election administration. And that is going to be kind of holistic, talking about the actual career path of elections administration. There are a number of very good studies and surveys that have been conducted for the past decade, specifically for elections administrators, to see how the kind of career path has changed, the satisfaction of the job, how the job itself has evolved over time. We're very fortunate in Boone County that it's a large part of my job as the county clerk. But if you go next door to any of our neighboring counties, the third class counties have to take on a lot more than just elections administration. So as the election side of their job has grown, they've had to balance that with things like being the budget officer for the county, making sure that all of the different administrative elements of county government still happen while weighing this huge, change in how we administer elections and the kind of, more, it's required more resources, it's required more time, and how that has impacted whether people stay in these jobs as long as they used to, whether people are entering the field like they used to, and just kind of an overall idea of where we are for elections administration. There's been a lot of, I think, national news about how people are fleeing the field and all that kind of stuff. And there's a lot more nuance than just that. So I wanted to take some time to talk about that. Throughout this, I also want to encourage everybody, feel free to ask questions, put them in the chat or ask them in person. If there's something that you see on this syllabus of 8 classes that you're like, oh, I want to make sure that you cover that, let me know so that I can incorporate it. I want to make sure that the information that I'm providing answers the questions for the people that are taking this class, because I know what I find interesting, but I don't know what everybody finds interesting. So feel free, I will cover as much as I can in the confines of our hour and a half. Anybody have questions up to this point? Okay. So we will jump into it. This is a very, very detailed, if you took the class before, this should look familiar, although I did retool it a little bit because we have added some things and changed some things around. So now it's not in portrait mode. It makes a lot more sense in landscape. But this is a very, very, very high level overview of all the different parts of creating an election. And you can't tell too much from looking at it, but it is in chronological order, where at the top of it in blue, that is the election calendar where the election is called. So 10 weeks before every election date is when we know what's going to be on the ballot. And that's when everything kind of shifts down through this schematic. So we receive the certifications, we're creating the election, we're making sure we have polling places, we're setting up the ballots, we're getting the voting equipment ready, we're recruiting and training judges, absentee voting is happening, voter registration is up there at the top, and voter education, because those are happening all the time. So those are kind of evergreen things, but they do form a lot of the foundation of everything else that happens. And then as you shift down the schematic, you get to election day, all the preparation, and then finally at the end, certification, which involves that audit process that I mentioned in the beginning that we'll go over in another class, and all the things that kind of wrap up election day. So all the little yellow squares, ballots, polling places, voting equipment, election judges, election day, absentee voting, voter registration. Those are the large concept areas that we've got 11 people in the office. They all kind of break up different tasks of things. And all of these things are happening at the same time. So while we are making sure that the voting equipment is ready, people are making sure the election judges are being trained. So it's all happening at the same time, but all relative to each other. So if we make a change, for example, on one of these, like we order the ballots at a particular time because we have received the certifications and gotten that ready to go, when we order the ballots has a direct influence on when we can send sample ballots, on when we can test the voting equipment, on when absentee voting has the ballots ready to go. All those things are intertwined. So I actually made this so that in our office, we can have a better sense of how we all connect with each other as we're going through the process. So this is not really meant to be like oh, okay, now I totally understand how elections work. This is just meant to kind of ground you in all these things are happening. This is everything that's involved in an election in a somewhat succinct way. So how do we know all those processes that I created in that schematic? How do we know how to create them all? How to know that all those things happen? We have statutes and rules, both federal and state. The National Voter Registration Act, the Help America Vote Act, Americans with Disabilities Act, those are all things that influence our voter registration processes, our voting equipment, our polling places. All of those have some component within federal law. And then we have chapters of state law, Chapter 51, 115, and 116, that deal with election processes and also like general county clerk work. So Chapter 51 is very administrative, bureaucratic kind of, we have to be, the county clerk is the secretary to the county commission. So we take the meeting minutes and we do the agendas. That's all contained in that general county clerk law. Chapter 115 is what we refer to when we're looking at this election is coming up. What are the dates and deadlines? What are the requirements? Those are all in Chapter 115. And then Chapter 116 is all the initiative petition laws. So there's actually a whole separate set of laws that deal with those initiative petitions that come in to the Secretary of State's office and that we then process in our county offices. And then Division 30 of the Code of State Regulations. So state regulations, and I will preface this also by saying I am an attorney, but I am not your attorney. So this is not legal advice. This is just an explanation of how the Code of State Regulations and laws work together. So for anything in Chapter 115 that says that there is a process that needs to happen, the Secretary of State's office is empowered through several of those laws in Chapter 115 to create the structure for that and the process for that. And where they do that is in the Code of State Regulations. So, for example, when we test voting equipment, the Chapter 115 law just says test the voting equipment. It doesn't say how, it doesn't say what you need to do. It just says test the voting equipment, make sure it's tested before you go and put it out. Division 30 of the Code of State Regulations, the Secretary of State's office has created a very extensive list of things that include that testing. So it says there's going to be a test deck involved. That test deck has to have some undervotes. It needs to have some overvotes. It needs to have all these different iterations of things so that you know at the end that your equipment can handle any way that a ballot is tested. that kind of detail is written in the Code of State Regulations. It doesn't carry exactly the same power as a law, so it's not passed by the legislature. It is just created through an administrative rule process, but it is very important to the way that we process things and run our elections. So we treat it at the clerk level like it is a law. Oh, don't do that. So we treat it like it is a law. We make sure that we are following the things in the Code of State Regulations so that holistically we are creating an election administration system that ticks all those boxes. So aligning election administration with those laws is one of the things that my office is for. We make sure that the processes that we have meet all the criteria that the law requires us to have. And then one of my roles is also to keep up with the changes. So anytime that we have a administrative change in the Code of State Regulations from the Secretary of State's office, or anytime the legislature makes a change to Chapter 115 or Chapter 51, then we need to be apprised of it. We keep up with those things, and it may mean that we have to change some of our processes. So that schematic may change based on what the legislature decides to ask us to do, or what the Secretary of State's office decides to ask us to do. So those are all how we make sure that everything is done with elections. There is a question in the chat that I'm going to get to in the next couple of slides about how to do list maintenance and removing deceased voters and people that have moved out. So we're going to jump into that right now. Laying the foundation. Do we have any questions up to this point on the basic, like, when I got elected and walked in, how did I know what to do to run an election? I went to the laws and the Code of State Regulations. We have processes in our office to make sure that we do all of those things. That's how we guide the work that we're doing. Okay, so laying the foundation of that, we've got these processes in place, but nobody can really participate in our democracy if they aren't registered to vote. So the voter registration component of elections is really like the first foundation of creating the election. Next, you've got ballot content and creation to make sure that every voter that's registered then also gets a ballot for the upcoming election. Then we've got to make sure that the voting equipment that we're using can count all those ballots and that voters can accessibly use that equipment. And then they are going to be voting on those things in absentee voting period and on election day. So that's another foundational part. And then at the end, to make sure that everything was done correctly, we're doing the certification and audits. So that's super high level. That's why I say we've got 8 classes to cover that. That's why we're going to expand upon things, because today is just going to be a quick run through of all of this, just so that you have an idea of the 5 basic things that cover an election. Yes.
Have you worked with Wendy Noren quite a bit?
I did. So the question for people on the thing was, did I work with Wendy Noren? I worked with Wendy Noren when I was in the Secretary of State's office. So we worked on online voter registration together and on a lot of legislative things to pick her brain on better ways that we could be writing Chapter 115, because she had lots of thoughts on those. And I'd say a large share of what we do in the office was set up with the foundation from what she created in the office. So we are building upon building on good ideas. And that's where we've gotten to today. So starting with voter registration, which, as I mentioned in the beginning, is a year-round process. It's evergreen. You can register to vote 24/7, any day of the year. It is the basis of eligibility to participate in the election. In Missouri, you've got to be at least 17 and a half years old. You've got to be a U.S. citizen, a Missouri resident. You can't be serving a felony sentence. You can be in jail, but you can't be serving a felony sentence. And you have to have not been adjudged incapacitated by the court. That basically means that you can't have a guardianship. If you have a guardianship, you can retain the right to vote, but the judge that is granting the guardianship has to specifically say that you retain the right to vote. So those are the 2 ways to kind of get disqualified. If you start serving a felony sentence, you get put in this disqualified status, so you can't vote while you're on it. Same for being adjudged incapacitated. You're disqualified. You could come off of guardianship status and be reinstated, and then you can vote again. But those are the two ways that you end up being disqualified. When the actual voter registration application comes into our office, so a person says, yep, I'm at least 17 and a half, I'm a US citizen, I'm a Missouri resident, I am not serving a felony sentence currently, and I'm not adjudged incapacitated, I can do this. They fill out that application, they give it to our office. Whether it's online, whether it is by email, whether it's in person, whether it's by mail, every voter registration is going to get checked against 4 state and federal databases to make sure that you meet the criteria. You're going to get checked against the Missouri Department of Health and Human Services because that is our death records match. So if there is a death record on file, if there's a death certificate on file, we're going to see that. So if somebody tries to register in somebody else's name that has passed away, it's going to pop up and say, this person is not alive. Don't register this person because they are not alive. And then we would investigate how that happened. We also get ongoing information from the Department of Health and Human Services through the Secretary of State's office to let us know if anybody currently on our roll shows up on that Department of Health and Senior Services list so that we can remove them after they've passed away. We also have access through, all of this is through the Secretary of State's office, this report system. We get information from the Department of Corrections. So if somebody's currently serving a felony sentence, then we can know to take them into disqualified status. We check them against the Social Security Administration list to make sure that they are an actual living person. And then we also have access, if somebody gives us their Missouri driver's license number, to check against the Department of Revenue to verify that they are an actual person too, because if they have a DMV record, then that means that they've shown a bunch of things, documentation to get their driver's license. And so we know that they're a real person in that sense as well. Oh, yes.
Is this just an initial certification, or is this checked before each election?
It is checked anytime a voter record is touched. So if you are just changing your address, we go through these checks every single time. We get reports, and I think it's on the next page, but we get reports if there's anybody, like I said, Department of Health and Human Services will get a list weekly or monthly that says, here's the people that match now that you need to remove. So we get those reports on an ongoing basis, in addition to other things, but just from the outset, when a voter registration comes in, those 4 are checked immediately. And that includes a change of address, a change of name. Anytime we get some documentation from a voter, those 4 checks are run. All of the voter registration information when we're processing them is stored in a statewide database called MCVR. It's the Missouri Centralized Voter Registration Database, and it's maintained by the Secretary of State's office. So we have access to it, but it is technically the Secretary of State's database, and that's how we have the interaction with the federal and state. In order to have access to things like the Social Security Administration data, they're not signing a contract with me, Boone County. They're contracting with the state of Missouri so that we can leverage that relationship and use that information. So there's really nothing that I can get directly from either the state or the federal government that doesn't pass through the Secretary of State's office, except for things like court records. Like the circuit court will give us a list of people that have felonies so that we can check them against the voter registration roll and see if they need to be disqualified. So we're constantly that's why I say it's a year-long process, because even if people are not registering, we're constantly getting information about the people on the roll so that we can keep them updated. Messed up my clicker. Okay. But people move away and they pass away and they become ineligible. What do we do about that? So this is where we get the kind of value added information. We get those reports from the Secretary of State's office that include things like people that have passed away, but we also rely a lot on mailings. And that is partly because that's what federal law requires us to do. A lot of our stuff is based on mailings. But we've been able to leverage that over time as better reports and more efficient reports have become available. So the national change of address is part of the post office. So if you change your address with the post office, we don't automatically get that. which is a huge misconception. People think that, oh, I updated my address at the post office, I updated my voter registration. No, we are separate systems, and we are not empowered to update your address just because you updated it with the post office. What we're able to do is take an action based on that. So we have access to the National Change of Address. It will give us a list of everybody that has filed a National Change of Address with the post office, but we can't take the post office word for it that you have a new address. All that we can do is then mail you a forwardable piece of mail that says, hey, we have information that thinks that you moved. National Change of Address says you moved. Did you move? If you moved, please give us your address. So that is one of the ways that we make sure that we're keeping track of anybody that has moved either in Boone County or out of Boone County, because we care just as much about people that are moving within the county as we do leaving. A clean voter roll requires current addresses, not just people that live here or don't live here. We care whether you live in Hallsville or in Ashland, or if you've moved, or even if you've moved apartments. If we try to send you mail and it bounces back to us and all that's changed is you've moved down the hall of your apartment complex, you will still be canvassed just like you would if you moved completely out of the state. So we use that National Change of Address. The biennial canvass is required under state and federal law, where we, instead of starting with the National Change of Address, we mail you something first. That's what the sample ballots are. So everybody's getting their sample ballots right now for the April election. You're part of our voter registration maintenance. So yes, it's also great voter education to send out sample ballots, but it's also how we keep our voter list clean. So when we send out the sample ballot mailings, like we have for this week, we're going to get a bunch of them that bounce back to us because people have moved. And when we get those bounced back to us, just like as we get the National Change of Address information that lets us know that somebody moved, we now are on notice that this person probably moved. Otherwise, that sample ballot wouldn't have bounced back. That triggers us to send out a forwardable piece of mail that says, hey, we tried to mail you something. You didn't get it, so you must have moved. Give us your new information or confirm that you don't live here anymore. We do that for every single election that we have. So we do more than what's required under the biannual canvass requirement. We will do it for small elections, big elections. It doesn't matter. We will send out the sample ballot mailing because it's how we keep the voter list updated. And then the sample ballot email, if you've given us your email address, and we have, you would have gotten that this week as well. That also is a great proactive way that we've found to encourage people to update their address immediately. So every time we send a sample ballot email out, for one thing, it's free for us to do that. So it's a cost savings for us instead of having to rely on the mail. But for another, voters can take care of it immediately because we have online voter registration. So you can update your information immediately. So we always get several hundred removal requests and changes of address forms pretty instantaneously once we send those sample ballot emails. So it's a great way that we keep the list maintained, or we'll get more information about stuff. We send out a sample ballot and then somebody will reply to that, especially the emails, and they'll be like, oh, this person moved last week. And so then we can kind of work, it's a lot more personalized, and we can get that to be a much more like ongoing process instead of waiting every 2 years. And then we send a sample ballot and then someone's really irate because the person hasn't lived there in 2 years. And they go, this person hasn't lived here in 2 years. Why are you still sending me their mail? Well, because if we haven't tried to email or mail you something in the past 2 years, we're going to have a much less clean voter list. So that's why I have on there, too long, didn't read, check your mail. The mail is very important. If we get people that are irate that this person hasn't lived here in 2 years, why are you still sending us mail? It's because you didn't put the mail back in the box and say return to sender. If we don't get notice that the mail can't be delivered for a person, if you just throw the mail away for a previous resident, we don't know that they don't live there anymore, and we can't take our actions. So check your mail, because if you are getting mail for a previous person, we are not going to have any opportunity to fix it if we don't know. Yes.
If there's no response, what happens?
If there's no response to the second letter?
Yeah, if you send, are you still living there?
Yeah, that's a
And
great
if you don't
question.
respond, what happens?
That's a great question. So yeah, I'll go over that real quick. So once the second letter goes out, the forwardable email goes out, it says, hey, update your information. If we don't hear from you, you go into inactive status. So inactive status means that you're going to have to take some sort of action before you can vote again. You can take the action on election day, so it's not like it's preventing you from participating in the election, but your record now reflects that we know you are not where you're supposed to be, or that we don't have current information for you. So when you're in inactive status, it generally means that somebody needs to update their address, so they can do that on election day, or it means that they really have moved. And in those situations, once they're in inactive status, if they don't take any sort of action for 2 federal elections, so we send you the sample ballot for the April election now. Nothing, we get the sample ballot back, we send out something, we don't hear from you. You go into inactive status, and then you're in inactive status in November of 26 and November of 28. In December of 28, you will be deleted from the roll. It's slow, it's designed to be voter kind of safe, so that if you don't get the mail because the post office screws up, you don't get deleted just because of that. And you can't be deleted just because you don't participate. In Missouri, you can't be deleted just because you don't vote. If you register to vote and you never vote ever, but you also never move, you can be a registered voter on the roll. The only thing that's ever going to remove you is that we have information that you don't live where you say that you live and you don't vote. Yes.
So again, if they're in inactive status and they send in an absentee ballot, is that counted?
They won't get an absentee ballot if they're in inactive status. Only voters that are in active status, because we have to have confirmation of where they live. So if they're in inactive status and they apply for an absentee application, then we have to have them fill out an application to confirm their address. So they have to sign under penalty of perjury that they live where they say that they live and fill out the absentee ballot application. So nothing can be done. We cannot do anything for anybody in inactive status until they take a step to move back to active status. And once they're in inactive status, we don't mail them anything else either. Inactive voters don't get sample ballots. So if you haven't gotten a sample ballot in a while, check online. One of the things that we have on our website, and the reason it's important, is that you can look up your own voter information. So if you haven't gotten a mailed sample ballot for a while and you've wondered, if you look yourself up on our website, you can see where we have your address. So if it's your old address, if you moved 6 months ago and didn't update your address with us, then that's why you're not getting your sample ballot. So we try to provide as many opportunities as possible for people to see what their address is on the website, check your sample ballot and those kinds of things, so that you don't end up on election day showing up and you're deleted because we didn't get any information from you.
What percentage of people in Boone County do change addresses or whatever that causes a problem when it comes to election day? Is it a tiny percentage or?
It's a relatively small percentage, but I think like with most things, there's an element of kind of intersectionality. So if you are if you change apartments a lot, if you're relatively transient, which can be influenced by like your income status or your socioeconomic status. So you may move a lot. If you are a person that moves a lot, you're probably going to be in inactive status quite a bit. If you are relatively stable, you've been in the same house for 20 years, you're never going to be inactive because you haven't moved. So I will say for the canvassing portion of this, because while we can have an ongoing process where we're touching voters all the time to get them to update their address, the removal part, being in inactive status and not voting for 2 federal elections, that removal part's been very consistent, where at the end, in the December after each major election, so in an even numbered year in December, that's when we do the deletion of anybody that's been in inactive status and hasn't voted in 2 federal elections. That's consistently been about 8,000 to 9,000 voters. So every 2 years, we delete 8,000 to 9,000 voters in one go. So we're constantly updating things. People are getting deleted as we go, but we're almost always carrying 8,000 to 9,000 voters on our roll that aren't here, but we haven't gotten information for. And some of this too, and we'll get into it more with the voter registration class, there are better ways to do this. I'm not saying that this is like a perfect system or that I'm thrilled and we have a perfect system doing it by mail and all that. There are better ways. There are different resources that we don't necessarily have available in Missouri, but had we could, move a little bit faster and more efficiently. But given the current process that we have a pretty decent number of people that are just kind of, wouldn't call them dead weight, but they're just old records, really, that we can't do anything about until after a federal election.
By now, we should have gotten our email.
Yes, yes. So if you didn't get your email, one of 2 reasons. One is if you already voted absentee or you requested an absentee ballot, you're not going to get a sample ballot because you've already asked for an absentee ballot. Why do you need your sample ballot? The same thing. Or we don't have a good email address for you. I mean, we get a lot of them bouncing back. We sent out 50,000 emails for this, which is great because I've actually found just by talking to other counties that a lot of counties don't even ask for addresses because email addresses are optional. But I found a ton of use and people really like having the ability to get stuff by email. So we're seeing an increasing number of people providing their email address, even though it's optional, and it allows us to have better communication with voters. So yes, if you haven't gotten one and you're on this call or here, let me know and I'll look into why that might be.
I tend to get it, know it's from you all, and just go on because I don't ever move.
Yes,
So,
and there's a lot that happens with that too. I think a lot of people kind of see it and they go, I know what this is, and they don't look at it. But we do include, I'll say at least, especially for the mailing ones, we do include really helpful information things in there, like dates and deadlines and anything else that might be related to the election that you might want to know. So I encourage everybody to open it, knowing that a lot of people don't. But it's useful not just for us, but for you. So that's a very quick voter registration maintenance kind of overview of how the year-round process works. The workflow for each election, while voter registration is happening, you start with the creation of the election, candidate filing and certification to our office, creating the election and ballots administratively to make sure that we have those things. And then we move into absentee voting, the voting equipment preparation, testing, and then finally the election itself and the audit and certification that happens afterwards. So that's the flow that we're going to be going through that I'm just going to run through quickly as an overview to make sure everyone is on the same page. So every election that happens, if you're thinking about it in terms of, oh, election's just one day, what do you do for the rest of the time? Election preparation starts 20 weeks before every election. So in even numbered years, especially when we've got 3 elections, last year we actually had 4 elections because the city of Ashland had a special election in February. 20 weeks before that, we're preparing for all those things. So there's a lot of overlap that happens too. Between the April and the August and November, we're preparing for multiple elections at the same time. We're just at different parts of the process. So candidate filing for these offices happens 17 to 20 weeks before Election Day. Before that happens, the entities that are going to be taking the filings need to notify the public. So they're going to put out things in the newspaper that talk about what the qualifications are, what the requirements are, where they should file, all those different types of things. The state and federal offices, when those are on the ballot in even numbered years, they're going to file with the Secretary of State's office. And the Secretary of State's office is going to let all the county clerks know who filed That's the certification. If it's a county office in an even numbered year, they're going to file with us. So they're going to come to the county clerk's office and they're going to fill out their candidate declaration form with us. And then for school boards, cities, fire districts, anything that's a local office, they're going to file with whatever the administrative body is for that office. So for school districts, for CPS, they go over to the Aslan building and file with the board secretary. For the city of Columbia, they file with the city clerk. All of that filing happens outside of the county clerk's office, and our role is to kind of just be the administrative pass-through to receive whatever was filed with those cities and school districts and school boards, and then put them on a ballot. So that candidate filing happens. For the April election, candidate filing is actually in December, except for the city of Columbia, which has a charter, which has candidate filing going through January. But most of this is happening in December for an April election. So right after we got done with the November 2024 election, we had to turn around and get right into candidate filing. The county offices, there are county offices that were on local ballots. So the Boone Hospital trustees file with our office for the April election. So we had to turn around and have all of that ready to go on December 1st so that Boone Hospital trustees could come in and file if they wanted to. Once they have, whether it's our office, the Secretary of State's office, the school boards, whatever it is, we have to have 10 weeks before election day, everything that indicates that they're going to have an election. So that's a notice of election, it's a sample ballot, and then generally it's also the newspaper that they published their notification that the filing was going to happen in, so that we have proof that they actually told the public that filing was going to open. So that all happened. January 25th for this election was the deadline for the April election. So we were working on the April election at the beginning of January. So at this point, we've been working on it for quite some time. A lot of things have happened in between. And just for kind of a sense of like, well, what happens when there's not an election? There's always an election. Something's always happening. These notices of election can look like this. So on the left side, I guess it's the same side that I'm looking at. On the left side, that is a local notice of election. So that's a school board notice of election. It says at the top, there's notice to the qualified voters that we're going to have this election. The sample official ballot is all of the candidates that filed with them in the order that they filed or the order that they want them to appear on the ballot. They give that to us, and we will put that sample ballot on as a race on the official ballot. On the right-hand side, the certified candidate, that certification, that's the list that we will get from the Secretary of State's office when we're getting ready for an August primary election, because candidate filing for August primary elections happens in February and March. They send that to us, and then we turn that into a ballot. So a lot of our role in the county clerk's office is taking in information, reconstructing it, and then spitting it out as a ballot in an election ready to go. Any questions about that part?
You have to be on your toes pretty much though, to know what's going on statewide.
Yes. We try to keep checked in, and there will be an example foreshadowing. There are examples of when this process doesn't work like it's supposed to, and then we have to get courts involved, and we have to do things that allow us to then put something on the ballot or create a new election or whatever it is, because there's not. Even though all of the statutes and things say you need to do things, the statutes just say, provide the notice of election to the county clerk. It doesn't say what the notice of election has to look like. It doesn't say a format. It doesn't have like a nice default template. It's just let them know. And so sometimes we get things in lots of different formats, and it can be very difficult sometimes to make sure that everything is correct and wrapped up like it should be. So those are challenges that are kind of endemic to that decentralized nature of our election system. And it can have interesting results and consequences as a result of that. If you look up my name in CaseNet, Hartsburg has sued me 3 times because we've they've missed the deadline to certify for us. And the resolution for that to put Hartsburg on the ballot is for them to sue me. So we enter into like a mutual judgment where they tell me what they want on the ballot. I say that sounds great. And then we just basically get the court to bless it, and then we can put it on the ballot. So that's the fun part about, it's like herding cats a little bit, but it's fun.
But that's their tradition to miss the deadline.
Past few years it has been.
Yeah.
But Hartsburg is also interesting because their tradition is to elect everybody by write-in. So one of the reasons I think that happens is because they don't have anybody file. Everybody just shows up on election day and writes in the name that they want to put in.
That was in my district.
Yeah. Okay, so at this point in the process, we're 9 to 10 weeks out in this scenario, and we are creating the election and ordering the ballots. So we've gotten all the stuff in from the certification. We're going to enter all that information in to make sure that everything is correct. So this is a parallel system that's going to happen. First, we need to make sure that the voter registration records, which are all tied to specific districts. So if you are registered on Ash Street, you're in a specific school district, a specific city ward, a specific fire district, all those things. That's all tied together in your voter registration record so that when we add somebody to that address, we know what districts they are eligible to vote in. In order for us to make sure that you get the right ballot, we have to create the election in the statewide voter registration system so that every voter gets tied to the ballot that they need to see. That includes all the districts that their address allows them to vote for. And that's also why it's important that we have your current address. And it does make a difference whether you have moved across the hall of an apartment if a district line goes through that apartment, and it might. We have houses where, especially on county lines, where it's based on where the bedroom is. So if you sleep in this part of the house, it's in this district. But if you sleep in another part of the house, you might be in a different district. So addresses are incredibly important to us. So we have to make sure that all the elections are tied together so that if you live, for example, in County Commission District 1 and State Representative District 1, you get the ballot that says that instead of County Commission District B with State Representative District 2. So that process happens where we are putting that into the statewide voter registration system. Then we're putting all the same information, not the voter information, but all the same district information and candidates and everything that has been certified to us into the software that we use to create the ballots themselves. So the ballots and the voting equipment media, all of our tabulators take USB sticks, we put those in, and that's what has the definition of the election on it. That's got to be programmed in the software. It's programmed on a standalone computer that we have behind locked doors in our office. There's a window. You can watch the person that is programming the machine do it. That computer is not connected to the internet, and no part of it ever interacts with the statewide voter registration database. That's why it's a parallel system. So in order to do that, in our office, it means we have to have a lot of checks to make sure that we're creating the same election. Because the worst thing that could happen is we create one election in MCVR and then we miss something while we're creating the ballots. So there's a lot of mechanisms where we do checks and balances and proofing to make sure that all of that is correct and working properly. And it's helpful to do it parallel anyway, because then we can check on each other. So if somebody adds something and they're like, I'm pretty sure this district should have this on it, and we missed it in the other system, then we can fix it that way too. So it's a good check and balance that we're doing things in parallel. And once we have gotten to the point of creating the election in both of those systems, then we have to do the more kind of manual stuff of, okay, how many ballots do we now need to order? There's 500 voters that are in this ballot style. We're going to order X number of ballots to make sure we don't run out. We look at expected turnout. So for the April election, 25% turnout is probably what we're going to be looking at. So we take that into account when we order so that we're not over ordering or under ordering. We try to get to a happy medium so that we don't waste things. And then once the ballots themselves are created, we can proof them. They come out as PDFs out of the system. So the ballots themselves are approved in paper format and in PDF format. And then we order them, we get them printed, and then we inventory them and keep them securely collected with little tags on them to indicate that they have been sealed up. And there's chain of custody forms that follow them all throughout Election Day. So if you've worked as an election judge before, you know that when we provide you with the ballots for your polling place, they have a ton of seals on them, along with a certification sheet that says the seal numbers that should be on them, so that you've got two set of eyes, bipartisan set of eyes, checking to make sure that nobody's tampered with those seals and that nothing has happened to those ballots before they're used on Election Day. And that includes the total number of ballots. So if you get to the end of Election Day and you are missing a ton of ballots, you would know because we would have the certification paperwork. Or if all of a sudden you saw more ballots than should be there, then you know something went terribly wrong because we have everything documented from the time that they get sent to us, tested, and then sent back out to the polling places. So we track all of that all through the way. There's one question, and I apologize. There was a question about absentee ballots. I'll get to that during the absentee ballot part. But there was a question, if the standalone computer is not connected to the internet, how are the results reported? That's a great question. So the computer that we use to program the ballots is also going to be the one that does all the tabulating. We print out the results from that computer directly. So we have a piece of paper that has all the results on it. We also can scan that in as a PDF and export out information on a single-use USB that is not put back into the computer. So it's exported out, never imported in. So the information's come out of that computer physically. Then it goes to another computer in the office, anybody's computer that's just generically connected to the internet. Usually it's my computer. And that computer has the ability to be on the internet. So we take the piece of paper and for the state, for example, they have in the statewide voter registration database a report where you literally type in the results from the piece of paper. So on election night, when we have a state election or federal election, the even numbered years, we are physically sitting in the office, typing the numbers in that came off of our tabulators to send them to the Secretary of State. So nothing is emailed to the Secretary of State. Nothing is like sent from our actual machines. It's physically inputted by our staff into the statewide voter registration system. And then during the certification process, that printout is physically mailed to the Secretary of State's office so that they can check the paper against what we entered into their statewide voter registration system. So that's how the state gets our information. Nothing is emailed to them or sent to them electronically. It's all very manual. And then for the news agencies and things like that, they just get that off of our website. So when we upload the PDF to the websites, they just look at the PDF. We also have a rendering where those numbers that we input in, that we have all of the election results, we just had IT write a pretty script to go over it to make it look nice on the web page, so that you're not just looking. The PDF is not very nice. If you go to our election results page, at any point, all the PDFs are there. It's not fancy. It's just like a list of the results. So it's a pretty manual process. Nothing happens automatically. And for those types of things, nothing happens over the internet either, because it's just saved on our computer and then uploaded so that IT can put it on our website. So we also don't even use software vendors. There's some outside vendors that will create like a really pretty ballot results page. We don't do that either. So we're pretty low tech when it comes to our election results, but we're better than the counties that don't put anything on the internet, because sometimes it can be very hard for local elections, especially here. If you can't find results on a county webpage, because a county might not even have a webpage, then it really is just the county is, in a lot of cases, calling the news agency or sending them an email of the PDF so that when you go to ABC 17, you can see the aggregated results, for example, Fayette School Board, because we have like 12 voters from Fayette School Board. Everybody else is in Howard County. You have to add together Boone County and Howard County's results. ABC 17 is the one doing that. There's no other way that those results get added together except by a third party, because I'm not adding it together with Howard County. Howard County's not adding it together with us. We're certifying the 12 votes that we had for Fayette. They're certifying the hundreds of votes that they had, and we're both giving them to the Fayette School Board for them to have their final results. So some of it is that decentralized part, that can be one of the consequences of it, is that everything's just a little more manual. And the tabulator is not connected to the internet. No parts of the tabulation and the election results, none of that is connected to the internet. So once we are done with our results, they go onto our website, or they get typed into the state system, and that's where the results are. Our official results are pieces of paper. So we went that far. I'm going to pull it back a little bit to talk more about the voting equipment. Every piece of it is tested before each election. It's logic and accuracy testing. The picture there is our tabulator. So that tabulator, you can't see it exactly well in the picture, but on the top of it, right underneath the that blue screen, you can see kind of like a little red sticker. That's the seal sticker. That goes over a little door that has a key on it. So you, as a place where you put a key. Put a little key in there, you open it up, there's a slot for a USB stick. That's where the USB stick goes. And as the ballots get fed into the tabulator throughout the day, the results themselves are stored on the USB stick. And then the ballots are also kept at the bottom of it. So if something ever happened to that USB stick, we'd still have all the paper ballots. That's the official record of the actual election. So in order to make sure that it's going to count all those ballots correctly, we go through logic and accuracy testing, which is conducted publicly, but also by our bipartisan teams of election judges. So they come in, they create a test deck of ballots, and they run them through all of the machines that we're going to be using on election day. And then they take the USB sticks and they take the results, and they make sure that the results from those USBs match what the test deck results should be. So they hand count the test deck, and then they check it against what's on the USBs of the machines. To make sure that everything counts accurately, once they have verified that they're counting accurately, everything gets sealed up. That's why that red seal is on there. Excuse me. And the sealed up tabulators are then sent out to the polling places, where we've got the chain of custody, again, just like we do with the ballots, where you're going to break the seals and make sure that they all match their certificates. Same thing for the equipment. There's inventory tags on them. All of the supplies have tamper evidence seals on them. All of those get checked by the election judges as part of the process of setting up the polling place on Tuesday morning.
Where do the paper ballots go during all that? Go with the...
They go with the supervisors. So the supervisors pick up the ballots, and then one of the supervisors has them. When they get to the polling place on election morning, the other supervisor of the opposite party is the one that checks to make sure that that supervisor didn't do anything to the ballots while they were in there. Any questions about that part of it? I'd say anybody, I don't know who else is on the screen, but if anybody served as an election judge before, one of the things new judges always say is that we have so many checklists and so many different things they're going to check off on. They had no idea how many things that they'd be required to sign when they signed up to be an election judge. But we need to make sure that we have the point of the chain of custody is to make sure nothing is messed with, but also so that we can put together a full picture of the election after the fact. If we needed to recreate what had happened, we can do that with all the checklists and the inventory tags and chain of custody. So while all of that is happening, absentee voting is also happening. So for us, for the April election, it started February 25th for the excused portion of it. So for the first absentee voting, 6 weeks long. For the first 4 weeks of it, you need a reason to ask for an absentee ballot. So that means that we need everything ready to go 6 weeks before the elections. The ballots have to be done. We have to have absentee ballot applications processed and ready to go. And this is where I'll jump back to the other question about absentee. How is signature matching done? So signature matching is one of those things for absentee voting where it's not actually in Chapter 115. It's not required. It's a best practice that we do. So when an absentee ballot application comes in, it gets tied to the voter's record that they've asked for an absentee ballot. But we check the personal identifying information on the application and the signature against what's in the voter registration record already to make sure that that person is really asking for the absentee ballot. So we process all of those as those come in. And then we're also assisting voters that come in person in that time. We've had about 27 people that have voted in person for the April election so far. There's various reasons you can vote right now. If you're going to be out of town, if you have an illness or a disability, if you are a healthcare worker or first responder or law enforcement, those are all reasons to vote before Election Day. So that process is ongoing over the 6 weeks. We're also hiring and training election judges. So our election judge training starts next week. And we've been recruiting election judges over the past couple of weeks to make sure that we have enough people for all of our polling locations. And then we're also doing online or ongoing voter education, online, in person, by mail, all of those things. We have voter education in the sample ballot mailings. We have social media presence. We put everything on our main page. So if you go to our website right now, it has all the dates and deadlines, all of our usual weekend locations for absentee voting are on there. And it provides a bunch of resources for voters that they can go to as well. So we're in this period of time right now. This is the actual period of time that we're in right now. We get to Election Day, and then we are ready to go for voting. So our polling places are open from 6 a.m. to 7 p.m. We are a photo ID state, so you need to provide a Missouri driver's license or non-driver's license, a U.S. passport or passport card, or a military ID. I don't like to say unexpired on here because then it makes people think like, oh my gosh, it's expired by a day, I can't use it. The way the law is written, it can be expired as long as it was after the date of the last federal election. So November 8th was the last federal election. If your license expired in December of 24, then we can take that. That's okay. So it's unexpired except for a small period of time when it could be expired. If you don't have one of those photo IDs, if all you have is a Illinois license because you just moved here a month ago and you haven't had time to update your information, you do have a provisional ballot option that's available if you don't have a state or federal issued ID, Missouri state issued ID. Provisional ballots are only available on Election Day. They're not available during absentee voting. And we check those after Election Day during that certification and audit period. And that is a signature matching requirement. So provisional ballots that are cast, we check the signature on those against the signature on the voter registration record. That's the only signature matching requirement that's in the law. It pertains to provisional ballots. So we check that. Like I said, we do check absentee applications and absentee ballot signatures as a value add because it's a best practice and we should all be doing it, but it is not a required thing. On Election Day, we also have central polling places that are available. So central polling locations really just mean they have every ballot style available there. So anybody can go to vote there. They're not going to be turned away and told that that's not their assigned polling location. We have 3 of them for most elections. The Boone County Government Center, Friendship Baptist Church, and Woodcrest Chapel are our 3 central polling places that are open all the time. For November of 24, we also put one on campus at Mizzou at Memorial Union because we knew that we would have high turnout for the students on campus. And that worked out very well because we had almost 2,000 people that came through. So instead of shuffling them off to our usual polls and then having them navigate that, we put everybody at a central poll, and that made it a lot simpler, a lot easier for our poll workers and election judges to help them, but also easier for the voters to know I can go to this one place and get everything done that I need to do. All of the polling places, whether they are central or assigned, have bipartisan election judge teams at each location. And I know I keep saying election judge and poll worker, they are interchangeable. Under state law, they're called election judges, but they're poll workers. Most people will just say poll workers. We don't have a hierarchical system or anything. We have election judges, and we do have 2 supervisors at each of them, but they're just supervisor election judges. So
They're the ones that people turn to ask the weird questions.
yes,
Yeah.
they're the ones that are in charge of questions, supplies, breaks for the other election judges. Like, they are true supervisors of the polling places, and they get special training for that.
Are poll workers required to be, what's the working day for a poll worker?
So it is before the polls open. So for a smaller election, it's at between 5 and 5:30 that they have to be there. So usually about 5. For major elections, it's 4:30. And then they have to be there until they are done doing all of the reconciliation and closing of the poll, which is usually about 8 o'clock at night. We do have split shifts available. It's something that we added a couple years ago that has been popular. But what we ask in order for you to do a split shift is that you sign up with your partner when you sign up to work, and that you hold each other accountable. So in order for us to maintain party balance, for example, we do ask that you sign up with somebody that's your same party, so that if you are representing as an election judge the Republican Party, your half-day shift partner also has to be a Republican, so that we don't end up being out of balance. And whoever signs up for the first shift has to take responsibility. If their partner doesn't show up for the second shift, they have to continue working. We have had quite a few, lots of times it's like sisters or family members or things like that that will split the day, and they do a really good job of that. The only kind of caveat to that is they can't be supervisors if they're going to do that. If you're going to be a supervisor, you have to be there the entire day. So once everything is done on election night, that's when we have our election judge supervisors. So before election day, how they're checking each other about the ballots, and the supervisor takes the ballots home. When they come back, they get checked. On election night, they're coming together. So the supervisors get in the same car, they get in one of their cars, because they've got voted ballots now. They're not the blank ballots like the beginning of the day. These are voted ballots and election results. They have to be together the entire time. So they come back to our office and they come in and process all of their paperwork and give all of that to our office. We have kind of a checkpoint system of different stations where they come in and they give the results to one part of the office, and then they give their supplies to one and all that, so that they don't have anything that they still have on them. And then they have to go back to their poll so that they can get the other car. So it's some work as supervisors. We expect a lot out of them, and they're really wonderful. They come back a lot. We have a lot of longtime serving supervisors. Once we've got the election results in our office, that's when those USBs are imported back into that standalone computer that's not connected to the internet. That's the process of importing the tabulated results. Is the USBs literally just put into this standalone computer, and then we wait for it to upload. And then when it's uploaded, we move on to the next USB and we do that. So for me, it's very stressful, because when we're really good and efficient and all the election judges come back within 45 minutes of each other, all the USBs from all those polls have to be imported one at a time. So For the November election, for example, we had 60 polls. That's 60 USBs. We actually had more than that because some of our polls had more than one tabulator at them because we knew they'd be very busy. So between those and our absentee results, we had to upload like 80 USB sticks, one at a time, and we can't start doing that until 7 p.m. So it's just waiting for the system to upload all of them. So when people are saying, it's stressful for me because when people are saying like, where are the results? We don't have them. The judges are back. It's because we just have to sit there and watch the thing load, and it'll load, and then we can move on to the next one. So we try to find times where, okay, we've loaded 16 of these. Let's do a set of results so that everybody's not just waiting and getting everything in one go. So that's how the election results end up being tabulated and all of that. And then that evening and then going throughout the next few weeks, all the election materials are sealed up. They're locked in the vault. In our clerk's office, we have a vault, and they are kept there and securely stored. And all of the materials for elections are kept for 22 months. So we have to keep all the ballots, all of the absentee ballot envelopes, all of those things for 22 months. They're kept securely, and then we can securely destroy them after that. So all this has happened. How do we know that the election was correct? Because at this point, we're going through this whole process. We have all these checks and balances, but we want to make sure that everything was done correctly. That is when we have a 2-week period of time called the post-election certification process, where we go through what the election judges accounted for, all the voting equipment, all the supplies, making sure that we have all those things. It's also why we very big on our results say unofficial on the election night results, because we can't officially say that they are full and audited results until we've gone through certification. So very rarely does anything demonstrably change, but part of the certification process is counting those provisional ballots that were cast on election day, counting any military and overseas ballots that were received because they have a slightly longer deadline, and then counting any of the write-in votes. So in Hartsburg, for example, they don't have any unofficial election results because the write-ins aren't done until certification. So on election night in Hartsburg, they don't know who won. They won't know until we go through certification. So there can be things that change throughout the post-election process, because if there's a very close race, but there's 5 provisional ballots that were cast, it could change the outcome of the race. We haven't had that happen here, but that's just because it hasn't happened here. It's entirely possible that something could happen. So all those votes are still being adjudicated. Everything's being processed by these bipartisan election judge teams during the certification process. And then most importantly, in my mind, we do a hand count of all the ballots cast from a randomly selected 5% of precincts. And that's true for all counties. That's something that is dictated in the law and in the Code of State Regulations to make sure that we are putting eyes on our ballots to check them against the tabulator results. In the time that I have been here, we have not had anything change. We have not had any results that have been overturned because they found some systemic problem with auditing. Actually, it's a long process, and most of the time what we run into is the hand counting errors. So what we'll do, because we don't just count all the ballots in one go. You have to count the races. So you'll say, all right, I'm going to do the hand count now of the school board. So you've got to count all of the different school board iterations, because some person may vote for one person, some may vote for 2 people, some may vote for a different 2 people. And you have to put those all into piles, and then you have to count those all up. And then you have to match them to what the results were. Well, sometimes one ballot might get put in the wrong pile, and then you're like, I'm showing one less and I'm showing one more over here. And then you have to sort through all the piles again and find that ballot and pull it back over. So it's a long process because it's very manual. And that is a good thing. We want it to happen like that so that we can be assured that everything is happening like it should be. So the picture on there, you can see we're sorting those things into ballots. So usually what they do is put them in little groups of 10. So they'll sort them out first, and then they'll put them in stacks of 10 so that they can count easier. It's an open to the public process. It's not the most interesting thing to watch, but it is a good way to learn more about how the process works. So once we're done with that, that is considered the end of the election process. Let's see. Timing wise, I think I'm doing okay. I'm probably going to end a little bit early. But I will take whatever questions anybody has, but I also wanted to put up here some things to consider for next week's class as we start thinking more about some more specific things in voter registration. So we put out a biennial report every 2 years. So far, it's only been 2. But our second one is 2023 and 2024. And it's on our website under our voter education link. And it's got data from each of the elections, but then also the different improvements that we've made over the last couple of years, things that we've done a little bit differently, some community initiatives we've tried to do. Take a look at that. For data, it's really interesting to look at how our absentee proportions have gone up. More people are voting absentee because we've got no excuse absentee voting. Different ways that we have tried to improve our election results processing, for example. We purchased on-demand poll printers, and those printers print your ballot automatically when you come in to vote absentee or to central poll. And that has given us the ability to have more granular election results. So these are all things that we put a great deal of thought and time into 10, 20 weeks before each election, so that by the time we get to the election, we're ready to go with whatever the changes we're going to make. Something else to consider, review your sample ballot, bring it to class. If you get it mailed to you, bring one in just to kind of go over what it looks like, or you can look it up on the website. It's available there as well. And then the last thing that I ask of people, and you don't have to necessarily share it, but think about what one word you would use to describe elections in Boone County and in Missouri and in the country. And think about if you think that's the same word. There's a lot of really interesting research about the same way people talk about Congress, like, oh, Congress is terrible and I hate Congress, but I like my congressperson. There's a lot of that happens with elections too. Well, I trust that everything's happening great in my county or in my city. I don't know what's happening at the state level. I definitely don't like what's happening in that other state. And so think about that, and we'll get into that a little bit more in future classes. I think it's a good thought experiment about elections in general, since we are so decentralized. But that was the last thing that I had on here. So I'm happy to take questions preliminarily or about something that you already know that you want to have answered in this class, so that I can make sure that we do answer it and talk about it. Yeah.
2 questions. One, my impression is that the April election is always a low turnout election. Would Boone County, City of Columbia, could they combine that with another election, like the November election, and try to get a wider turnout?
That is a great question. So for the people on Zoom, the question was, April is a low turnout election, which it is. Would it improve our election results if we were to combine it with another election? Yes, in general, if you put it on an election that had higher turnout, you would improve the turnout, but then you run into down ballot drop-off issues. And what I think would potentially happen, based on other places that have had this, is that you'd still have the same number of people turning out, but you're not going to increase like the salience or the information of those voters necessarily. So they're just not going to vote in the local races, because they're usually going to be at the bottom of the race. So if they come in and they're all, excited to vote for their congressperson and governor and all those types of things, they're going to get really tired of filling out a ballot if there's now like 50 things on the ballot. So from that perspective, turnout will increase, but the number of votes for those particular races may not. And the other thing is, it would, from an administrative standpoint, may end up resulting in having 2 ballots per person, which is what some of the larger jurisdictions have too when they consolidate their elections. So then not only are you having like long ballots, you may have 2 pieces of paper per ballot because there's just not enough room for all the races on the ballot. Yeah.
Another part of that is, could Boone County or Columbia legally do that, or is there a requirement for them to have an April?
So they are required to have a municipal election in April, and there's a lot of, they can play with it in the fringes a little bit, like this. Boone County can't. Boone County is not a charter county, so we are beholden to what's in Chapter 115. The city of Columbia does have its own charter. So like when people start talking about, what if we had ranked choice voting? The city of Columbia could do ranked choice voting for the selection of their candidates if they wanted to do that. So there are things around the fringes they could do. Could they change the date of the election? Likely not, because there's so many other statutes that impact them. So like when people even talk about changing school board races, okay, what if we made the school board elected in November? Well, all these other DESI statutes and things say that certain things have to happen in May and they have to happen within 2 weeks of the April election. If there's no way to comply with those, then you end up having conflicting statutes. So there's a lot of things happening in the legislature now that try to move the April election to November. I can't say that clerks are super in favor of it, but it's a big thing to unravel if you're going to do it.
The other question is just, for my information, does the Secretary of State, what do they do besides elections?
So the Secretary of State's office oversees elections, although they don't have authority to tell us what to do in most cases. So they oversee elections, but really their main job is making sure that we have the resources we need, like the state voter registration system. They also do business licenses. They do the state libraries. They do the state archives. They do a lot of stuff with securities and commissions, notaries. Lots of kind of administrative business tasks are in the office. Any other questions?
There may have been one more set of questions from a person online.
Oh, one question that I was going to hit is it possible for an unhoused person to vote in Boone County? Yes, it is possible for an unhoused person to vote in Boone County. They just need to tell us where they reside. And that may be on a street corner. That's okay. We can still address point them to where they need to be for that district. Or they may choose a shelter that they stay at or something like that. But yeah, there's not just because somebody doesn't have a physical address doesn't mean that we can't add them. We just need to know physically where they are. You can't be registered at a post office box or a UPS box or something like that. You have to be registered where you physically are, which can be a challenge, especially for college students, because college students get ingrained when they get oriented that they need to never give out their actual home address and they only give out their mailing address. We need where they actually live. So if they're getting it at a generic residence hall, if that's where they get their mail, we need their room number and everything. We can't just say, oh, they get it at their mailbox. Don't think there's anything else in the chat.
Okay, well,
Thank you.
So next week, things to consider, fantastic. We'll look forward to maybe seeing a few more people in person. We had 2 intrepid people that came this morning, including 3, including Brianna. So thanks, everyone. We'll see you next week, same time, same place, same Zoom. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.